I'm Eric Bricker, and I've been a psychotherapist for over 25 years. One thing I can tell you for certain is that no one makes it through life unscathed. At some point, many of us will rely on the trusted counsel of another person to help us navigate difficult times, or to reconcile a troubled past. Whether conventional or unconventional, professional or informal, there are a lot of different forms that helping relationships can take. This podcast is an exploration into what makes these relationships work. Who are the people that help us? How do they help us? What do people need help with? My hope is to uncover as much as I can about this very human phenomenon, and I hope that you'll join me. This is the Good Counsel Podcast. Welcome to the Good Counsel Podcast, Dr. Matthew Durso. You are a PhD degreed licensed psychotherapist and clinical director of the Renaissance Recovery Treatment Center in Lantana, Florida. You and I had met around 10 years ago when your ascendance toward these achievements in academic and career success seemed, well, less than probable. In your own words, the bigger challenge was whether or not I'd see 25 years of age. And yet, here we are. We live in an era where hundreds of thousands of an entire generation have been consumed by the ravages of the opioid epidemic. It is a most unique form of human illness, like a parasite that decays the host from the inside out, weaponizing our own propensity for compulsive consumption against us. Much has been said about the social plague of addiction. Yet, as of this moment, there is no cure. The prospects for those afflicted with are dismal. All will suffer, many will die, some will survive with great struggle, and very rarely there is someone like yourself who thrives. To explain the phenomenon that separates yourself from the irretrievable potential claimed by the opioid epidemic is elusive. It is not surprising that this explanation has been relegated to the realm of spiritual phenomenon, mysticism, and miracles. In your doctoral dissertation, you subjected your own experience in Alcoholics Anonymous to the discipline of academic rigor and scrutiny. Today, I look forward to hearing what you have learned. Dr. Matthew Durso, welcome to the Good Counsel Podcast.
Thank you. Really, really nice words.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And a great description of the opioid epidemic, which for some reason still kind of spikes survivors' remorse, you know?
Is that an experience that you have?
Yeah. Because I think of the people that became statistics of like the death rate. And then, you know, I look at all the wonderful things I have going on. I'm like, geez, I've been like chosen or spared, or like I was told early on, shown grace and mercy, though I was worthy of neither, you know? So, but I'm doing my part in like carrying the message and being somebody that made it, you know?
You certainly are. And
Yeah.
that's the elusive mystery of it all, right? Is what separates those that make it from those that don't, because you see extraordinary talent and potential and ability come through treatment. It's hard to predict who's going to make it, who's going to survive, who's going to be successful. Often the people you choose, this guy's got it, is not the person who succeeds. And often the person that you think there's no way is the person who succeeds. And it really seems to defy any predictability.
Yeah.
And some folks just do something along the way that allows them to succeed and thrive and move forward. And to date, it seems that you really have been one of those people, continue to be one of those people, furthered yourself in education, and are working in the field now, the clinical director of a treatment center. That's pretty much what I was doing when you and I met 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's really quite an extraordinary ascendance, and just statistically very unlikely.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's wild. I'm living the life beyond my wildest dreams. And I remember my dad asked my friend and me once, what is the difference between people who make it and who don't? You know, why do some people, you know, recover and other people sort of fall to the illness? And while you can usually look and say like, okay, if this person follows this course of action, they're likely to have a good outcome. A certain part of it is just like luck and good fortune, and the stars kind of align for some people when they don't align for other people. And that's a tough thing as somebody who made it out, you know, as of today at least, to try to justify, you know, some people have to die so other people can live. It's like, you know, why? Because I know a lot of young men that did lose the battle before 25 that were as charismatic and intelligent and capable as me. And they would be doing something like I'm doing and maybe a different discipline or maybe the same exact thing. But they don't get that opportunity. They left at like 22, you know? So, but yeah, it's the fact of life that there's no explanation that gives me like a lot of comfort. But
it's interesting because I was really looking forward to getting you in here for a lot of different reasons. One, we have a shared history, and I take great satisfaction, and it brings me happiness to know that you've done everything that you're doing to kind of see what you're up to. There's a men's group that you do in the building where I work, so I run into you while you're actually doing your thing once in a while, and we've spent a considerable amount of time talking, and you're telling me about now being the clinical director of a treatment center and all of the different things that you have to deal with. It's a pretty big operation over there. So it's considerable work, and you are not just a therapist, but you're a leader. You're running the show. Yeah. And I look at that and I'm like, wow, that's incredible and awesome. And I'm glad that you get to do those things. But also in your doctoral work, a high level of education. They don't just give those things out. I mean, you really, in order to get a dissertation past the review board of a department, especially like at a state university, it has to pass academic rigor. Yeah. You can't just write a paper and turn it in and they're like, oh, this is really good. Kid writes well. You know,
there's a lot.
It's going to be challenged. There are standards. You have to demonstrate the efficacy of what you've done. Yeah. You have to be able to prove that what you're saying is true. Yes. And you've done that. And yet the thing that you've chosen is Alcoholics Anonymous, which is not really a clinical discipline. There's not a lot of people writing about Alcoholics Anonymous in peer-reviewed journals where they're doing double-blind studies to demonstrate that this is more effective than something else. Yeah. So where did you even begin to find research that you could use in that setting?
Good question, man. The first part is so true, because when we were talking about my findings and I was thinking about this conversation, and, you know, I defended my dissertation in December of 2023. So it's been a little while. And at the time I had all the information like ready to sort of rifle off to defend and to hopefully, you know, graduate. But since then, it's become a little blurry. So I not only reread my dissertation between the time that we kind of scheduled this and today, but I watched a video of myself defending that my chair recorded from his seat. Oh, wow. So I was like rewatching myself in the prime of knowing all this stuff and being in that sweet spot of my research and stuff. And it reminded me about the answer to your question. So like, it's sort of, there's so many moving parts, but to kind of consolidate it down, over 90% of substance use treatment facilities in the US incorporate 12-step ideology into clinical programming and like the general structure of the place, right? Whether it's mandatory meetings or, you know, case managers to ask if you have a sponsor or stuff like that, or groups are about the steps and there's prayer meditation, the steps are on the wall. You know, yet the gap that I sort of landed on was, we have how many therapists in the United States working in a substance use treatment space that don't know the first thing about the 12 steps. They're working at an agency that doesn't necessarily base their whole curriculum off of the 12-step ideology, but it's a piece of where they are employed, and yet they're doing therapy work with clients, and they might not know the first thing about why people work the steps in an attempt to get sober. So now, like, my whole thing was like, well, are they knowledgeable? I wanted to find that out. If they're not knowledgeable, how can we foster education? And is there utility in the therapist having 12-step knowledge or familiarity with the mechanics and the fundamentals of a 12-step program of recovery? So that was like my whole thing, because to boil it down, I think that every therapist working with clients in general, but of course, more specifically, substance use clients, you need to have a baseline knowledge of the steps, because of how much it revolutionized my life and so many of my friends and so many clients that I've seen get off the hamster wheel of 20, 30, 40 treatment centers over the course of a couple of years. The research says that when the therapist, facilitates 12-step participation in session, the client is more likely to do it. So how do you effectively facilitate your client to go and there's so much to talk about, not to attend 12-step meetings, but to actively participate in the program? How do you do that if you don't know anything about the program? It's like me facilitating fitness when the greatest piece of advice that I could give someone is go to the gym. Right? That's probably not going to yield great results for that person. They could go to the gym and be on their phone, sitting on an exercise bike, not even pedaling. And then they could come out and say, I went, but they're not getting healthier. They're not getting more fit because I'm not facilitating involvement as well as I could. I need to learn about fitness, and I need to tell you, go do cardio a few days or go lift weights, and then the diet stuff. Same thing with the steps. I think that therapists, if they're going to facilitate involvement, they need some sort of familiarity or competency with like the belief system of the 12-step program.
I want to say something about that because it's a really interesting point. One of my first jobs working in treatment was for Hanley Hazelden. It's now the Hanley Center, but the time I worked there, it was a Hazelden.
Yeah.
The significance of that is that the Hazelden facilities, when they started in Minnesota, they were really the first, and they developed something. Well, a guy by the name of John Anderson developed this Minnesota model.
Yeah.
And Hazelden was really the first institution to operationalize it specifically for the treatment of substance use disorders. And that involved, the Minnesota model itself involved the integration of 12-step recovery into like a therapeutic setting, merging prayer and also medical care. So it operationalized this sort of spirituality and informal support group methodology into something that was more formal and could be taught and worked through clinically. And so Hazelden went on to publish all of these books and pamphlets and handouts that were manageable enough for the clients themselves to be able to read, to understand. So it's like you're teaching someone how to get sober. And also the staff there could digest this material. So like myself, not being in recovery, I could read about it and I could understand it. I had meetings that I could go to. Like there was an opportunity for me to educate myself. Mm-hmm. And at the facility, they had the addiction counselor education program. And these were all the steps that in the state of Florida that you would take to become a certified addictions counselor, to be certified by the state or by the Florida board of the Florida Certification Board. And so on the weekends, I would go to these courses and they were being taught, and they were teaching you how to confront disease and denial, and how to educate someone about steps, and what was something that you would do with a client in treatment to help operationalize their sense of step one. So like step one would be acknowledging that we're powerless over drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And so how would you help operationalize that? How would you work with someone like that in a therapeutic setting? Well, you might give them the assignment of writing this list of consequences that they experienced in their addiction that demonstrate to themselves and to the people in their group, yes, you made a pretty firm case that you don't have any control here, and that all of your previous attempts to control this thing on your own, they failed, and that you have an illness and you have to take a more serious look at this. You're not doing this on your terms. You need to embrace an abstinence-based program. And so I learned about all these things. I am a formally trained drug and alcohol counselor because of that experience. And that was really the way it was back in the 90s and the early 2000s. That was the way people were educated about treatment. And if you went into a treatment center and you weren't a person who was in recovery, or you didn't have this kind of training, you were sort of lost.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And then somehow or other, I think with the advent of specialty care and concerns about mental health and other things, trauma-informed care, we got a little bit lost. And we got a little bit lost because we're looking at all of these different elements of recovery. And I think there was also this other thing where people were going on, there were different elements of what now recovery was, because there were people who were going on things like Suboxone maintenance and these other things. So, and that created disruptions in the ideology, right? People were saying, well, is that really
gray
mean
area
that you're,
stuff?
are you really sober if you're doing this? And then in that case, do we then teach you about Alcoholics Anonymous and treatment if you're going to be on Suboxone? So there were all these different things that came in that changed everything. And I think we got away from
the basics.
That classic education of people knowing about 12-step recovery and being able to either be part of it or be able to talk to a client about it intelligently.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was very long-winded, but I got excited.
Yeah. And I think that there's some value to, you know, the developments that have taken place maybe since the time where substance use treatment was like super straightforward, kind of like you're describing, 90s or early 2000s, where they come in, they hate the Minnesota model, you know, some education on the 12 steps, and then encourage them to go work the steps with a sponsor and all that kind of stuff. You know, co-occurring mental health diagnoses and medication management and engagement in clinical sessions that are not super 12-step focused. The utility of that is backed up in the research, you know, like those are spokes on the wheel. But so many people that you know, participated in these follow-up studies after treatment, they say those who are still sober say that the 12-step affiliation is what I attribute my sustained recovery to. So
I think that's a very important point.
Yeah.
And in my experience of having worked in these institutions for 25 years at the time when I was doing that, one of the biggest problems with treatment centers, even really good ones, was the lack of attention to aftercare, the lack of attention to follow-up.
Yeah.
You can do a great job here, and you can be educated in addiction, and you can acknowledge certain things about yourself, and you can experience all kinds of growth in the 30 to 90 days, 120 days that you're here in the institution. But if that's not sustained in some meaningful way, if those changes are not sustained in some meaningful way afterwards, you're going to revert back into your old patterns.
Always,
And so all of that work is lost. And Alcoholics Anonymous and AA, NA, the 12-step recovery, and there's so many, CA, there's so many different ones. That's the aftercare, right? That's what makes it sustainable. That's where you continue to practice all that you learned in treatment. Or said as the adage goes, treatment is the place where you spend $60,000 to learn that meetings are free.
And that's why it's probably such a practical piece of the aftercare plan. And some of my research, you know, literature review is like so titanic and enormous. You have to sort of present everything that's out there on whatever variable you're talking about. So doing some research on Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step recovery groups, you know, they call them mutual aid groups for substance use recovery, and these journal articles and stuff. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. There's millions of meetings taking place on a daily basis in hundreds of countries and hundreds of languages and stuff like that. So when you're setting somebody up, they come to South Florida, which is like a hotbed for substance use recovery, and there's a meeting on every corner. But then they're going back to like Iowa, or they're going back to like Washington State, like off the grid. No disrespect to anyone who's from those places, but I always say that. I'm like, those places are all very obscure to me, but there's meetings there. There's people in recovery there. The same steps are on the wall. That same fellowship is there. This systematic approach to maintaining sobriety, like, is everywhere, whereas treatment facilities or therapists and psychiatric providers might be a little more challenging to find. Now it's like a little easier with telehealth and stuff like that. But if you're coming into treatment for addiction or alcoholism and finding a home group or someone who will sponsor you or meetings in your area is not part of your aftercare plan, somebody's failing you. So we do place a lot of emphasis on that where I work.
Tell me about the research itself. One of the things that you've just said that is interesting to me is that it sounds like in the research literature, the terminology that has been agreed upon is mutual aid group.
Yeah.
And that sort of supplants the idea of referring to 12-step recovery or AA itself. Is that what it is?
Yeah, like when they, certain studies, and I'll just say first and foremost that what you said earlier is exactly what I thought when I started my research and when I chose, 12-step. I chose 12-step knowledge, but obviously I had to talk about 12-step recovery like in general. I'm thinking that this is like this sort of mystical, spiritual program that's very difficult to quantify. It doesn't really lend itself to statistical analysis. And then you start to see the studies out there, and there's like over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles on the efficacy of 12-step recovery participation and on recovery outcomes like over the course of X amount of years. So there's a lot more research on it. I'm not the first that said I want to take this thing that's kind of like floats up in the air and can't really be measured. I want to measure it, So there's a lot of research, way more than I thought. 20 pages worth for my literature review of like, they took 100 clients. They followed those around who did, engage in a 12-step program on a daily or weekly basis versus those who did CBT or those who even did like a different, self-help group or mutual aid group. And the results were astounding, in favor of 12-step participation. So there's more that kind of says, and of course there was the 12-step facilitation therapy manual that was published, I think it was 1992, that they put it up against CBT, DBT, and solution-focused therapy, and it performed as well, if not better than, those tried and true modalities of therapy. So a lot of work has been done to give AA depth and weight, in the eyes of like a researcher or a clinician. But yeah.
So that's interesting. So just to kind of back up on that, because I was wondering how the research was constructed, like how the studies would be constructed. So now you're telling me that, and I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's the manualized stuff, which could be, you could give that to a group of clients and then have another group of clients use something else. And you can compare the outcomes on the manualized aspects of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah. It sounds very similar to what you were saying earlier about the training that you received. Like certain clinicians will go through a training to familiarize themselves with this 12-step facilitation therapy manual.
Well, my guess is that the manual probably was published by Hazelden Publishing.
Could be, yeah.
I mean, there's a strong...
I can't remember that guy's name. I think it was, Joseph Nowicki, I think. It was in 1992.
And if I'm wrong about that, because that really is just supposition on my part, but
I could see it though.
There's a better than likely possibility that was published by Hazelden Publishing, because they published all that stuff, including manualizing the first step itself and just being able to give that out to clients and saying, hey, this is your clinical work that has all of the identifying your consequences, things we talked about earlier. So that's one way they're doing research is comparing the manualized elements of 12-step recovery to other modalities of CBT or something else that you might use in the treatment environment. And
that's one.
And it sounds like the other big one was on the back end of looking at those people who are participating in the AA style mutual aid group versus some other form of support group.
Yeah, absolutely. And they differentiate attendance versus participation. So the outcomes for those, and there's a bunch of follow-up studies. The one that always sticks out to me is like a 45-year follow-up study in China for heroin users. And like on a 5-year interval, you know, the researchers are following up with those who participated in the initial study and basically saying, you know, are you still abstinent? And if yes, how? And, you know, the medication compliance and the engagement in clinical sessions in some capacity was cited, but the 12-step affiliation was the thing that those who were still abstinent said, that's how I haven't drank or used over the last 45 years, or since the last follow-up 5 years ago, I'm still in AA and I'm still sober.
Well, that's incredible. And part of what's incredible is that clearly the success in AA transcends the cultural barrier, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because this is China.
Yeah.
Because if you read AA, if you've ever read the big book, you can see it's largely based in a very Eurocentric, Judeo-Christian values. God is referenced in there, and a lot of things that are very based in biblical value.
Yeah.
And so you're going to this other country, and where those fundamentals are not necessarily part of the culture, but somehow or other, AA and these 12-step groups, this 12-step ideologies, they're still working.
Yes. And that leads me back to the original point of like fostering competency in therapists, because if you know, if you're not in AA, of course, maybe you're not doing some light reading over the weekend and really dissecting the 12-step literature. But if you're exposed to the We Agnostics chapter, you know that they say, this concept of God is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding, open to any man who seeks. It's simply a power that is greater than human. That's like the only criteria. So now that's been broadened so much and is such a universal concept that it could be applicable anywhere. It does not need to be in Bible Belt, Ohio in 1935 where it was written. I believe they did that deliberately. So if you are Jewish or Muslim or even agnostic, or you're a yogi, or you are Christian, or you're just not a spiritual guy at all, and it even says something like, I'm paraphrasing, but however inadequate my conception of God is, it's good enough, as long as it's not like my ex-girlfriend or like my probation officer, because those are human, So you could bring the ideology anywhere, and that's where like the therapist needs to know that, in my opinion. Now, the findings in my study did not really say that in order for a therapist to be, efficacious with treating opioid use disorder clients, they need 12-step knowledge. There wasn't like this huge takeaway that's like, yes, the therapist that knows about the steps is better treating OUD clients than the therapist who doesn't know the first thing about the steps. But one of the agenda items of my study, one of the purposes was to emphasize that these opioid use disorder clients can only benefit from their therapist having some sort of working knowledge of like the philosophy of AA and NA.
I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation to say that if you're going to be working in a treatment environment,
right?
And look, we're in South Florida. Yeah. This is like the Silicon Valley of substance abuse.
Yes, it sure is.
Addiction treatment, right?
Yeah.
So the vast majority of people that are coming out of master's level training educational institutions are going to be working in some kind of behavioral health,
Yeah.
probably that treats substance use disorders. I mean, that's the industry that's here, and that's where anybody can get a job.
Yes. And that was in my findings as well, right? Not only does KCREP have a standard which says that, you know, graduates from this university in counseling are expected to be competent in mutual aid groups for substance use recovery, you know, so that indicates that, like, you need to know what they are, and telling your client to go to a meeting, like, is that enough? But the other piece is that, like, I think it was over 90% of ACA members, the American Counseling Association, and 91% of APA members report having encountered at least one primary substance use client in their career. Now, that doesn't really say much, but that was, to me, that was like, I'm going to latch on to that. And I'm going to say, you know, and they didn't specialize in addiction therapy. They specialized in mood disorders or psychotic disorders or personality or family or whatever. But almost, you know, all of them said, yeah, there's been a time where I was moving along in my career and the person on the couch, their primary presenting problem was alcoholism or drug addiction.
Well, it seems to me that with the proliferation of the opioid epidemic and how far-reaching it is, that not having some general or basic understanding about addiction and substance use disorders and being a therapist out in the community, that would be like being a therapist and not understanding what depression was.
I completely agree. And yet, substance use disorders, again, right? All this stuff that came back to me when I reviewed my dissertation. Substance use disorders are like the most stigmatized diagnosis, like basically in the DSM-5. And it's the client population that clinicians want to avoid more than any other. You know, they have unfavorable views or opinions, like, and anecdotally, right? You know, professors don't want to teach it. Like, that's something that I noticed, and I have a very small, you know, experience with that, but I won't say the university, but, you know, it was understood that the reason I was an asset is because I want to teach substance use counseling. All the other professors are like, nah, that's not my thing. I don't want to do that, you know? So, like, yes, I agree with what you're saying, but it doesn't seem to be the case, you know?
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that, and I feel like it comes full circle. Because I'll tell you a little bit, just my own experience with it. I sort of stumbled into residential addictions treatment as a graduate student. I didn't really know very much about it, and I had no idea about the burgeoning industry of the South Florida area, that this is what was called the Mecca of recovery, where people were coming from all over the country, really all over the world, to participate in these treatment programs. I didn't know about any of that.
Literally our county.
Yeah. I was just trying to be a therapist. There was a treatment center. It was the National Recovery Institute. It was right across the street from FAU, where I was going to school, where you did your doctoral program. And I was advised that that would be some good experience for me to get, because at that time, my career aspirations sort of aligned with having a working understanding of addictions. I wanted to get involved in forensics, like working with the criminal population in prisons and things like that. And they said, well, you know, understanding being a drug counselor is a good entree into that world if that's something that you want to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap.
There's a lot of overlap. And so I went to work in this places, and I was a behavioral health tech on the weekends, and got to know a lot of these people and learned and listened. And I enjoy stories, and I'm a storyteller. I enjoy listening to stories. I'm always down for a good story.
Yeah.
And these people have some unbelievable stories. If you're looking for a story, this is before streaming television, and I spend an hour with any of these people. It's better than anything you're going to see on Netflix. Yeah. If you like a good story, you know,
their lives could be made into movies, action movies.
So many people with such compelling stories.
Yeah.
And so one day I happened to be driving the van. It's Christmas Day. I'm working that day, and there's the Alcathon. And what an Alcathon is, it's round the clock, 24-hour AA meetings. They make them available because historically, holidays are a very difficult time for the substance abusing population. So even a lot of the really high functioning people who are doing really well in sobriety, they make themselves available to tell their story and try to inspire folks at their lowest when they're lonely and struggling with addictions on the holidays, that today could be the day, you maybe turn a corner and need some inspiration. So I was there and I was sitting in the van in the parking lot, and someone saw me sitting in the van. Had dropped the clients off and I was waiting in the van, going to be waiting there a long time because there were a number of meetings. And someone saw me and then like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I dropped the clients off from the treatment center and I'm waiting in the van. And he's like, well, why don't you come inside?
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not a recovering person, man. I'm just like,
He's like, come on in.
He's like, well, I said that you can go.
Yeah.
And since I'm the one who's speaking at the next meeting and telling my story, I have the authority to invite you.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, okay. And in I go. And first of all, the stories are captivating. The whole vibe is captivating. There's something about being in that environment on a holiday that is immediately infectious. You're just drawn into the community and the love and the hope and all of it. I just was taken in by the whole thing. It was a very romantic notion of it all. And the speakers themselves, how captivating they were, the amount of humility they have, considering the accomplishments, always giving the glory of their accomplishments to the program itself, to their higher power, never taking credit for what it was they accomplished in their sobriety. All of that was really compelling. It was one of the few environments I'd ever seen in our society where men are freely hugging each other.
Yes.
You don't see a lot of that. And in AA, that's what's going on all the time. So there was a lot of affection and a lot of camaraderie and community. And it was hard not to get caught up in that and say, wow, this is really, really cool.
Yeah.
But the thing that really stood out to me was the reaction of the clients that I had brought over and how they experienced this. And a lot of people who were really shut down and maybe didn't cathect to the idea of group therapy and the things that were going on in the treatment center, in this environment, faced with these recovering miracles that were telling their stories and sharing, these guys came alive.
Yeah.
They were involved, they were engaged, they were present, they were connecting with people there, they wanted more of it, and you were sure, like, these people will come back here.
Yeah.
They may not do a lot and engage much in the treatment center, but if you put them in here, they're gonna want to participate. They like this. And there was something about it that really caught my attention. And I remember coming away from that being like, okay, I'm all in on this.
Yeah.
And
I'm an advocate now.
I'm into it. Like, this is really cool. And when you think about also in behavioral health, I had worked with chronically mentally ill people before and, other populations. And I had never seen outcomes like this.
Right.
The romantic nature of someone coming from this really low place where they're on death's doorstep and they can't even live in their own city anymore because no one wants anything to do with them.
Yeah.
And they come to South Florida with nothing but a trash bag full of clothing.
Yes.
And they go and they get sober and then they get a job and they discover their potential and they get free, and now they're helping other people, and then they establish a business, and then they get married and they have a family of their own, and they're doing all of these great things, and you're watching this and you're like, that's real. I know people who do that. And it's not just a couple of people, it's actually like a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? There's a lot, like I could be happy doing this. And then you find out that it's going on all around you. I said, I could really be on board with this. I can get excited about it.
Yeah.
And I guess I say all that to say, supporting what you're describing, that if people had the opportunities to have those experiences, especially non-recovering people like myself, who didn't really understand what AA was or what they were doing, and you got to see something like that, you would want to know more about it.
Yeah.
You would want to work in those places. I taught addiction education at FAU in the master's program for a couple semesters. I taught in the addiction professionals education at the Hanley Center because I was so fascinated by the whole thing and so compelled by all of it. and so invested in the idea of all of these miracles that it really captured my attention and desire to be part of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so to your point, I consider myself really fortunate to have worked at a place like Hazelden
Yeah. You get exposed.
where they educated me properly and I
Yeah.
could learn about all of these things in a formal way so that I could be a classically trained drug and alcohol counselor without having to have been in
Yes.
recovery.
Yeah, I agree. That, I think what you're describing is the rationale behind, and I didn't create this assignment, but when I was teaching the substance use counseling class in the master's program at FAU, there was an assignment that was called like a cultural immersion assignment, which means like you need to pick you know, essentially a mutual aid group meeting, and you need to go. And you need to kind of take notice of what goes on in there, and you need to engage and kind of throw yourself into the mix and then write like a reflection, and 98% of students choose a 12-step meeting. And, me grading the papers and reading what their takeaways were, they sound very, very similar to yours, which is like, I didn't know what it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a dark basement and a bunch of people smoking cigarettes and stuff. But everybody was talking about God and everybody was supporting each other. And there was like this gratitude and humility and fellowship. And you could tell that by the end of that course, there were some future therapists that may not have incorporated into their treatment plan, maybe for a substance use client, but after getting over there and seeing what it's all about, their tune changed a little bit. My dad was the same way. My dad presented me with my 10-year medallion in January of this year. So he flew down, and we went to a men's meeting together, and he had my coin and stuff. And it was a little bit odd, that the whole meeting ended up being about me, which I was not anticipating. You usually present someone with a medallion in the first 10 minutes, and then the meeting goes on as normal, as it normally would. But for some reason that night, everybody was sharing about me and their experiences with me and this and that. So my dad, it was a great meeting for my dad. It was a huge clout play for me. I felt like a celebrity that night, which was not great for my ego. But my dad, I can't count how many times after the fact he said, that is not what I was expecting. The profound things that people say and the clarity that they have and where they decide to place value and emphasis in their life. Like, 45-year-old dude with neck tattoos that looks like he's been through quite a bit, talking about how much he loves his brothers and how grateful he is to not use a day at a time. It's like, it's eye-opening. And that's probably a huge part of why, they always said in the doc program, choose a research topic that you're not going to be like clawing through or like resentful at or just like exhausted by, something that kind of lights your fire. And so everybody in my cohort, knowing what I know about them, they chose something that was either personal or just an interest. So for me, it was like a no-brainer. Opioid use disorder for the reasons that you read in the beginning of our conversation. And then like the utility of 12-step recovery, man, because it's like really powerful stuff,
Along the way of doing your research, did you discover anything that surprised you or anything that was previously unknown? I imagine you intuited much of what you would find and that it probably supported many of your preconceived notions based on your own experience.
Yeah. I think the most surprising thing that, when I really took a step back and thought about it and lined it up with my own experience and stuff, it wasn't that surprising, but to see that there was research that basically says therapists who have personal substance use experience have an inaccurate and elevated, self-efficacy about themselves as clinicians. So basically, and you could ask professors at Lynn University for my first semester or maybe two in the master's program, I thought because of my 12-step knowledge, I didn't really need to learn anything else. I was already God's gift to therapy because I had sponsored 20 men in the last 2 years of being sober. no clue that there was a code of ethics, no clue that there was a diagnostic process and interventions and theory and all this kind of stuff. And so when I read that, and I was putting a lot of stock in the idea that, therapists with substance use experience, therapists who are in recovery, and then therapists who are in recovery in a 12-step program, their self-efficacy beliefs about themselves are going to be higher, which they are, but they had studies where they basically put that to the test. Like, okay, you feel efficacious in treating substance use clients, but like, how effective are you? How knowledgeable or competent are you? And then there was a gap between the two. So I was surprised to see that, and there's a lot of research that says therapists with personal substance use experience are more like globally attractive to clients with addiction. They build stronger rapport. They retain clients longer. And so there's good things about therapists in recovery, which I am one. But that was a little bit alarming to me, that like self-efficacy is obviously like, it's a self-report sort of thing. It's a belief system. It's not really, it's hard to measure it other than the therapist kind of making a distinction about themselves. But therapists who are in recovery, they think that they're better than they are.
Well, there's definitely many names for that.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Untreated alcoholism being one of them.
There's many names for that. That's kind of a little bit of a liability. And as I was working in treatment, I definitely noticed a fundamental difference, right? That there were some people who would just lean heavy on the fact that they themselves were in recovery.
Yeah.
And that they, to say it differently, they kind of become glorified AA sponsors.
Oh, 1,000%.
It's not really the same as therapy. You're kind of relying on your experience of what you've done in mutual aid groups to kind of push you through the treatment process, because maybe you're lacking the internal resources of self-reflection.
Exactly.
Accurate self-reflection.
Yeah.
To recognize things like countertransference.
Yeah.
And countertransference being like the unaddressed elements of myself that I'm projecting on to somebody else.
Yeah.
So when I'm confronted with a client and we're not clicking, or the client's not doing well, or we're really having a tough time, or maybe I just don't like this person, I am more prone to attribute, well, this guy's just resistant. He's, constitutionally incapable of being honest with himself, or something like that.
No doubt about it.
That I might say about someone like a sponsee who's not functioning correctly, or a group member who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, as opposed to looking at what am I doing clinically or therapeutically that may not be working.
Yeah.
Because I'm not really looking at myself.
No, objectively, and the imposition of values or worldview or beliefs, it's taking place in this relationship. And that's why I think it's so beneficial for and I think it's like a rite of passage, for any therapist that's in recovery to be faced with a client that is a stone cold atheist and has absolutely no desire to participate in the 12-step recovery program. Because then your bread and butter is now taken away from you. So now what are you going to do? Do you have the skill? Do you have any other angle to approach this from? Or when it's like, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail kind of thing?
So what happened when you were confronted with that individual for the first time?
I sought supervision. I probably played a recording for my internship class, and everybody was able to hear that I hit a brick wall and that I was neglecting. It's a metaphor, but like I was like kicking my feet up and playing spades on my phone while they're talking about like evidence-based interventions. It's like the big book. I already have that on lock and key. So all this other stuff, the motivational interviewing piece, the behavior modification, the solution-focused stuff, it doesn't apply to me because I'm going to essentially sponsor my clients, right? That was the belief, is that this is what all my clients are going to be wowed by how well I know the book. They're all going to go get a sponsor and work the steps and have a personality change. They're going to stay sober, and I will never need to dip into my bag of theory or interventions.
You know, it's funny. I know a lot of recovering clinicians, my peers, people that I am honored and privileged to know, people
Yeah.
who are immensely talented, extraordinary people. A lot of them don't even specialize in treating addictions anymore. They've gone beyond to do like trauma work. My friend
Yeah.
Trisha Youngs, I'm going to help her moderate her book signing. The book signing is not about addiction. The book signing is about treating trauma, and other people that I know that treat sex addictions and all of these other different things that they're not even doing primary substance use disorders anymore. They've just gone on to just excel in these extraordinary and creative ways and their ability to help people.
Yeah.
And it's different, right? Like once you open up your lens beyond your own recovery experience and merge that with the clinical, it really opens up the door for something extraordinary to occur.
Yeah. You become a therapist,
But not just a therapist that's in recovery and understands the experience of these people in a different way, but plus you have all of the clinical acumen.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Which is why, and I don't do a lot of individual therapy now, like being in a leadership role. A lot more of what I do on a daily and weekly basis is like, overseeing a clinical team and the general happenings at the facility. But when I do find myself in therapy, like when we see each other in Boca, I have like a few clients who are in recovery, in AA. I like to carve out 5 minutes in the very beginning of the session to kind of get a gauge on where they are in their program. And I tell them, ideally, every week at the very beginning, you'll just tell me, yeah, I did like my 5th step over the weekend and now I'm on 6 and 7. It's like, all right, beautiful. Let's keep it. Now let's talk about non. And then the following week, it's like, yeah, we finished 6 and 7 and now I'm doing 8 and 9. Or I read Working with Others, I'm done. And now I'm looking for a sponsee. And then maybe it's like, I got a sponsee and I read the doctor's opinion with him. It's like, okay, cool. Now we could put that on the shelf. We're not going to have a step study in here. You know what I mean? And I don't want to conflict with anything that the client sponsor tells them. That's like a big deal too. And that's kind of the difference between facilitating involvement and maybe processing messages received in the program or, deciphering stuff that's written in the book versus like sponsoring your client. Then for the next 55 minutes of the session, now that I know that this person in my, clinical opinion is doing what needs to be done to, neutralize their condition outside of our sessions, we could talk about non-12-step related things. But I do like to check in. I just don't like to look at my watch and it's 40 minutes in and we're talking about, Bill and Bob and the literature and all this kind of stuff, because that's where the line gets blurred.
Right. It's different. And I imagine it takes a certain level of discipline to avoid falling into that.
Oh, it sucks. Yeah. Sometimes, because, sometimes it's like, the 12-step book says we're often able, intelligent, friendly people. The only difference about us is the effect that alcohol has on us, and we can't moderate. And when we stop, we can't. So a lot of times it's like, do you even need to be in therapy? Or do you just need to like work a program? There's not a whole lot to talk about after you have that spiritual experience or that personality change. The obsession is removed. You have this guide for living. Good things are happening for you as long as you sort of keep your foot on the gas. It's like, you don't have like a lot of other things going on, but I just don't like to, like you were saying, impose my will or have that countertransference go on in the session, because I am in a 12-step program in my personal life, and a huge part of it is altruism and, lack of profit motive and community spirit and service. Like I should not be getting paid for that, so.
In my private practice, I work with a number of people who are recovering people, and most of them are not there dealing with addiction recovery.
Yeah.
The vast majority of those people are taking advantage of other specialty.
Yeah.
Interpersonal relationship issues, trauma, family of origin, grief and loss. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I have found that working with those folks, especially the ones that are active in their program of recovery, they're different in the way that they approach therapy. And one of the great tools that many of them seem to have is this fallback into like this capacity for self-reflection that, in a way, if you look at it, it's almost systematic of, okay, what was my part in this? And that's a thing that you'll hear people, what was my part in this? How
Yeah.
did it affect me? What resentment am I carrying about this? You
Yeah.
know, and what am I responsible for in making amend? And that happens with even stuff that's completely unrelated to their substance uses, or that this might be a conversation we're talking about managing a friendship or managing a romantic relationship or managing a coworker that they're having a
Yeah.
problem with.
Yeah.
What was my part in this? Where am I still resentful? What do I need to make amends about? You know, and it's almost systematic, and you can tell when you hear it right away. It has a very familiar ring.
Yeah.
It's like, when all else fails, refer back to Recovery 101.
Yeah.
And it really creates a blueprint for a
Yeah.
better lifestyle of managing interpersonal processes. More so than folks who don't have something like that, that are often navigating these things from really utilizing therapy to build the blueprint for how to
Navigate
negotiate
life.
those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, absolutely. You're
Which
right.
you'll learn, but if you have that foundation, I think it just helps.
Yeah, it's formulaic, man, and it's universal. You know, it's not really, it used to be said the first step is the only step that talks about alcohol. You know, the next 11 steps are developing the blueprint that you just mentioned, you know?
That's not lost on me. And there's a whole interesting body of research and conversation about addiction itself being like an attachment disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And that really the fundamental cure and what AA provides people is a blueprint and a foundation to work on your interpersonal relationship issues.
Yeah.
Because all of those steps are really interpersonal in nature. It's how to be responsible in a relationship with another person.
How to show up in the world and not be in conflict with everyone and not deliberately cause harm and be inconsiderate and self-centered and dishonest, all that. Yeah. Now, the part that I remember my dissertation chair was a wonderful man, really intelligent and like super accomplished and past president of the ACA and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was a dog. And but his belief was that the reason that 12-step program works is not because a spiritual experience takes place and someone has that personality change. He believed that it was just because of the fellowship component. You know, people don't want to be in isolation. They don't want to be alone. They've kind of withdrawn from society because of drugs and alcohol. And now they go to these 60-minute meetings and they have friends essentially. And then that's what keeps them sober long term. And that was not really, I didn't agree with that. And I told him that. I'm like, I don't think that's a piece of it. You know, it's a side of the triangle, you know, the fellowship piece or the community and the unity stuff. But what you're talking about, I think is really the important part of being in a program like this. It equips you with the ability to do what your average person can already do, which is like interact with other people, take accountability for things that I do wrong when I fall short, make it right, try to endeavor to do better in the future, identify the things in my personality that are problematic and have been for many years. And then like, how do I correct that? How do I think of someone other than myself for 5 minutes out of the day, as opposed to just being like this ball of self-absorption, you know? So it goes far beyond the liquid in the bottle or the powder in the bag, you know, and it can really I thought it was funny when you and I talked on the phone and you said that I was likable, you know, back when we knew each other in 2015, because my memories of myself are like so negative. I thought that everyone was experiencing me like arrogant, resistant to suggestions, thinking that I was something that I was not really sure of who I was, behaviorally problematic and all this kind of stuff, when really like I didn't know how to do any of this stuff that I'm doing right now. I couldn't compose an email and click send, you know, I would quit halfway through and my whole life was like a wreck. And, you know, the reason I chose this as a variable in my study. And the reason I'm so passionate about it is because this was not in the cards for me, but this guide for living and this blueprint and this way of being the man that I was always capable of being was made possible through being in this program. So it's like, dude, I want therapists to know about it. I want clients to do it. I want these numbers to go down. I don't want so many people to die.
It's incredible to hear everything that you've done, and probably made more incredible by the fact that I have this reference to you during this other period of time in your life.
Yeah.
When all of this success would appear very unlikely.
Yes.
And here you are, right? And what's really great to see about all of this is the position that you've put yourself in, a position of leadership, where you're going to be able to utilize all of these ideas, academic, personal, spiritual, all of it, and bring it all together. And you are in a position of leadership where you're educating people, where you're leading people and guiding people and teaching them how to work with this population. And I think that it's gratifying to see what you're doing and to know that addiction treatment in South Florida, that it has a future, because there are really talented and exceptional people who are getting involved in it and willing to take the mantle and bring it forward in all of these ways that are needed. And you've done it all. Like you've put yourself through levels of rigor academically and all that really weren't necessary for you to be a clinical director, weren't necessary for you to be a therapist, to go and get the additional doctoral degree. And I guess the question I have about that is, it's more of a personal curiosity of why go through all that trouble after everything that you've been through and having to go and get 2 different degrees? Why go through the trouble of a doctorate? Like, why did you feel like you needed that?
I think there's a number of answers that all kind of play off of each other. First is that everything I do it alcoholically, So like I was finishing my master's degree and I thought I was done. And then a professor at Lynn was really urging me to apply and interview for the doc program. And I'm like, dude, you're like, 2/3 of the way there to like having the highest, just max it out and just like, just go crazy and do it like a fiend, And she empowered me to really believe that I could do it because I didn't think that I was capable of doing it. And she saw my work through the master's program and she was the one that said, you're capable. It's like not going to be too hard for you. So that's just like a piece of my personality that I don't usually do things like 20%. You can ask my mom about tattoos, she's like, it would be cool if you just had one, I'm like, I hear you. How about I raise you my entire bodysuit, But the other reason that I got the PhD was because I have always wanted to be a teacher. From a young age, I wanted to major in English and I wanted to be a professor somewhere. And I always liked that idea of working in academia and working with students. So I knew that PhD would position me, whether it's now, which I don't think it's now, or later, more likely.
I was going to ask you, are you teaching currently?
No.
Oh, so that's something you want to do later on?
Probably.
I certainly hope so, man. I really, really hope that you end up doing that, because your contribution, your potential contribution to the future, really of this entire field here in South Florida, it's pretty immeasurable. Like the potential for impact would be extraordinary.
Yeah, I believe it. I think that I'm a good guy to be in the front of the room because I can come from so many different angles and teach things, and give people a peek behind the curtain. I did that when I was teaching at FAU. I would screenshot notes and redact client names and I'd put it up and be like, this is what an individual therapy note looks like. This is what a UR form. This is what a treatment plan review looks like, or a continued stay ASAM, and they're like, oh shit, you have to do that every 14 days. Like, yeah, that's part of it in private, commercial treatment. So just being able to, I did not disclose to the students at FAU that I was in recovery. I just didn't want to. I didn't feel like it was appropriate. But I did tell them a lot about my professional experiences, sober living, behavioral health tech, alumni coordinator, intern, primary therapist, clinical director. I was able to really tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly, you know, of working in treatment. And I think that I'm uniquely qualified to do that. And I was able to also teach a lot about 12-step ideology too, which, let me just say, this is totally unrelated. I've been listening to the Sopranos podcast like every day. Michael Imperioli, who played Chrissy, he knows so much about the 12-step program. It's unbelievable. I have no idea how. He says, I'm not in recovery. I'm not an alcoholic. But every time, there's themes of addiction in the show. He plays a drug addict in the show. And he's always talking about the steps and the program in a way that's like so accurate. It's almost like, how does he know this unless he's been inside? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that,
He also sells a brand of tequila.
Yeah, him and Bobby. Yeah, him and Steve Sharippa. Yeah,
I've seen commercials for it.
I saw
on
commercials
TV.
for it too. Yeah. They're on the podcast together. They're like good friends.
So they have that conversation.
Yeah.
And it's like, and now a word from our sponsor.
Yeah. Buy our alcohol. Yeah. I do have one more answer to your question though that I think is important to say. Part of the lifestyle that I'm living is like grounded in living amends. And this is personal, like highly personal. I felt like a disappointment to my family for like such a long time, where they're at cookouts or they're with coworkers or they're talking to the neighbors and the neighbors are saying, my son is engaged, or my son just graduated, or my son had a baby, or my son got a promotion or whatever. And my dad for many years is like, yeah, my son is in rehab again. My son is in South Florida shuffling around and getting arrested and going to the hospital and relapsing and getting kicked out of facilities, for years and years and years. So when the substance use issue was kind of neutralized, then I got the bachelor's degree. And then, he was shocked when I said I want to go to grad school. Part of the reason for doing the PhD program was to like really make my family proud of me, and give them something really exciting. It wasn't for them, it was for me, but I thought that a byproduct of that would be, your son is a doctor. Now you look people in the eyes and say, yeah, he had a couple of issues that there should be no stigma around really, even though there is. But now look at, what he's doing now.
Having completed all these things, accomplished all these things, and put 10 years between you and the dark times that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Does that ever resolve itself, that feeling of disappointing your family? Do you ever get out from underneath that?
Yeah. And that comes from the blueprint that we were talking about too. So much about the way that I live my life today is like, I can only do what's within my power and control. I cannot turn back the hands of time and undo what was done, but I'm responsible for today and the hereafter, So every day, that's the nature of the living amends, is like to really rectify it with myself and with my family, is to just like not reoffend. That's true for any amends, So like when I looked my parents in the eye and said, I wasn't the best son I could have been, I'm going to endeavor to do better in the future. What can I do to make it right? They're like, don't, stop doing drugs. That's how you can make it right. So, what's done is done. And I got sober young, even though it didn't feel that way. I was a week before my 24th birthday. I look at kids in treatment now, they're 23. I'm like, you're a baby. But I felt like weathered, at the time. I did not feel like a young, chipper kid that's getting this thing young. I felt like worn down. But I can only do what I can do. And I'm doing what I can do on a daily basis, as to not reoffend and to re-traumatize my family and be the guy that goes from clinical director to like client and detox, which I'm like not willing to do. So therefore, like I continue to move my feet on a daily basis to stay sober.
It's an extraordinary thing. It really has. And this has been an incredible discussion. I will be reflecting on this and what you said and for a long time. And I want to thank you so much for coming in here and sharing all this with myself and with whomever tunes into this.
Yeah, of course.
This has really been Yeah, really incredible. And
Yeah.
to see everything that you're doing and to actually hear it, it's everything I hoped
Yeah.
we would get to talk about today. So thank you so much, Dr. Matthew Durso. Do you have anything you want to plug, or you want to give a shout out to the?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I love where I work. I love the work that I do. I believe that it's like, my purpose to help people identify and correct their issues, substance use being at the top of that list. But, don't be afraid to go to a mutual aid group meeting and throw your hand up and say, I have no idea what's going on or what I should be doing. All I know is I cannot stop drinking or getting high. And if you think that you have outside problems that may require outside help that a 12-step program can't address, go get it. Man, woman, or otherwise, there should be no stigma around that. Go get the support and the resources that you need, because I'm a living example of if you address that issue that's really holding you back, your life could be phenomenal, and I take responsibility for all of it, but credit for none of it, and I'll be at Commons Park in West Palm today, Lakeside course, playing disc golf at 4:30. If anybody wants to meet me there, play 18 holes with me. Yeah.
All right, man.
Thanks so much for having me. The very last thing I'll say is I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for you. And you said something to me when I was in treatment that I won't say here, but I've never forgotten this one sentence that you told me. And so you made an impact on me when I was a client and I was unsure if this thing was going to pan out. And to be colleagues with you and work out of the same office space when I was banged up in treatment, it's this 180 incredible kind of thing. So I'm grateful for you and knowing you.
Wow. Didn't see it coming, man. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. That means the world to me.
Yeah.
All right. All right, guys. This is the Good Counsel Podcast. This has been Dr. Matthew Durso. And again, thank you so much for coming out. You can check it out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and at my webpage, ericbrickerlmhc.com.